Welcome to the Daily Dawg Podcast. This is episode 53, and this is Wednesday, December 3rd. We are in the middle of our second Beat Bama week of the season. That's right. We have a second chance at beating Alabama, thanks to going to the SEC championship game. So, this is like I said, this is our episode 53 podcast. We're going to be in our four-quarter system today. So in quarter one, we're just going to take a look at the SEC championship, talk a little bit about the overview of the SEC championship game. And then we're going to start getting into, as we get into quarter two, we're going to talk about what this game's going to mean to Georgia and what we want to see. I mean, we know we want to win, but what is it going to mean? What's it going to do for us? What's the good and bad in being in it? There's a lot of discussion about that. In quarter three, we're going to get more into the comparisons, a little bit of the team. We're not going to do our full breakdown and predictions, but we're just going to overview a little bit about where these teams have been since they last met earlier in the season. We get to quarter four, we're going to take a bigger picture look at the playoffs. The playoff rankings were announced tonight. So you'll be seeing this podcast, or this podcast will be available on Wednesday, but it's Tuesday night. So you'll get a chance to, or we got a chance to take a look at the newest rankings, talk about what that means, what it's going to mean for Georgia going forward. All season long, we've been speculating. Are we a playoff team? Where are we going to be? Well, we've got a lot more answers on that now. So now we can kind of look at the field and talk about what do we want? We're at the penultimate rankings, right? So once the championship games are over this week, we'll get the final rankings, and we can start to really slot in and not just theorize, hey, what might happen if we got there? We can look at who's there, who's going to be there, who we think is going to be there, and what matchups and what do we want. So we're going to try and do that in quarter four. So maybe a little fuzzy in there as we work our way through those topics, but that's the big picture. Big picture, quarter one, let's take a look at the SEC championship in general, a little bit of the history of the game, a little bit of our history of the game. Quarter two, let's talk a little bit about what this specifically means to Georgia and what we think, a little bit of a preview of what we think might happen. We're going to break down the teams, a little bit more what they've been doing, what their stats look like, and how they've gotten here so far this season, especially between when we met, because it was back in week 4 when these two teams played, and now we're in week 15, or championship week. And then fourth quarter, again, we'll get into that big picture of the playoffs, SEC championship, and a few little topics I might want to opine on along the way. So we're going to jump in and get started there for quarter one. So let's get into it. First and foremost, this is the 34th SEC championship game. There's been 33 SEC championship games so far, and this will be Georgia's 13th time participating in this game, which will tie Florida. Florida has already been in this game 13 times. We'd been in it 12 times. So we will tie Florida. And also, one of the things I meant to point out in one of the earlier podcasts, but by getting to this 5th consecutive SEC championship game, Georgia also ties a record that Florida held for being the only team that had reached 5 consecutive SEC championship games. And they did that way back in the beginning of the history of the game. Back in the early days of the game, back when the game first started in 1992. I have to say I'm a little amazed actually to sit here and think about it. It's the 34th edition already of something that I remember being created out of thin air. The SEC was the first team ever, or the first conference ever, to engage in the championship game format. So we invented the championship game concept, and it's been a huge success for the SEC, and it's been a huge game each year to get the opportunity to see a champion crowned on the field. You might remember in the early days of the SEC, 1933 forward, when the conference formed, champions, well, first of all, teams didn't necessarily play that many conference games. I can remember some conference schedules where Georgia played 6 or 7 conference games in a season, and not everybody even played the same number of games. So sometimes if you go back and look in the annals of SEC history, you'll see where there's a SEC champion that was 5-0 and another SEC champion that was 6-0, and they were crowned co-champions. And so there was a lot of vague going on back then. And so the SEC championship game kind of brought a finality to it. I mean, there was a few seasons where there were 3 SEC co-champions, and one was not lesser than the other because they hadn't even necessarily all played if they had the same record. So so you look back in time and there's more SEC champions than there are actual years of the SEC. So that's because there's been multiple SEC champions for many years. And that was all eliminated in 1992 when the SEC championship game was formed. Of course, originally the SEC championship game was done by divisions. So Georgia was placed in the Eastern Division. And Auburn, Alabama, they were in the Western Division. Georgia was with Florida and Tennessee in the Eastern Division. LSU over in the Western Division. And so South Carolina, Vanderbilt with Georgia in the East, Kentucky. So Ole Miss, Mississippi State over in the West. You get the idea. So those teams, so it was an interesting. So you won your division, and then you got the chance to go and play in the SEC championship game. The downside of that was that sometimes the team that won the division, sometimes the divisions were kind of weak, and we saw this back when Georgia made its first ever SEC championship game 10 years after the game had been introduced in 2002. Georgia made, under Mark Richt, its first SEC championship game, won its first SEC championship in 20 years at that point when they won the game over Arkansas. And I believe, I didn't actually bring the score back up, but I was there at that game, and I do believe that the score was, I think it was 30-3 in that game. So, but I remember that Arkansas was not terribly competitive. I think they came into the game with a 9-3 record and ranked about 18th in the country, whereas Georgia was in the top 4, top 5. I know we finished that season in the top 3, but I'm not exactly sure where we were when we stepped into that game. But I think we were probably third or so. I think we were third when we came into that game. So it was a very unequal matchup, and that's the downside of what you got in the conference. I mean, in the division setup. Sometimes in the division setup, you got a really great matchup. You get maybe even 1 versus 2. We saw some epic matchups, and Georgia's been a part of those. This now will be the second most played edition of the SEC championship game, meaning the two teams in the game, Georgia and Alabama. This will be the 5th time that we have played Alabama in the SEC championship game. Georgia has also already played LSU 5 times in the SEC championship game. So those two matchups are the second most played, tied for the second most played matchups in the SEC championship game. The first most played matchup, this seemed to happen all the time in the first 10 years. It seemed like almost every game in the first 10 years of the SEC championship was Georgia versus Florida. And of course, Alabama versus Florida. And of course, Alabama was in a resurgent era. Gene Stallings had brought them back from wandering in the wilderness a little bit with occasional good seasons to a championship level run. And, and then, of course, at Florida, we had Steve Spurrier. And this was the sort of the peak Steve Spurrier era. And so, of course, he led the Gators to multiple SEC championships. So the good news for Georgia is we stack into our history, and I know that I bring up the history all the time, and I keep always trying to find the meaning or the idea behind it. Why is it so important to me? And I guess it's just another way in which we layer our fan experience, right? I mean, win or lose, for instance, we might lose this game. However, it'll still be another record that we've added to our history. When you look at the history books and you just enjoy the sort of being a part of Georgia football, and it's not just about this season. It's not just about each game, right? That's the great thing about something like Georgia football, which has been around for 120, 130 years, and it can be from generation to generation. I was the first member of my family to attend the University of Georgia. My family was not from this area originally. They moved in this area when I was a kid. So we didn't have family ties, but I've lived here most of my life. I've raised my kids. They now have the opportunity to go to the University of Georgia, build their own lore and history. And so, now we got second generation. And so, of course you can be a second generation of a pro fan. I mean, same thing. My kids also have been raised going to Braves baseball games. And so they certainly have the opportunity to just glom onto something that they weren't a part of. But it's special when you're a part of something, when you live there, when you went to school there, where you're a member of that. I keep wanting to try to find the right phrase. And one thing that gets used all the time lately is like tribe. And I'm not a big fan of the phrase tribe, but a sort of family or nation. Sometimes I walk around using Bulldog Nation or Dawg Nation because Dawg Nation's actually the branded name of sort of a competing podcast. Although I do call out Brandon Adams as an excellent podcast and one I recommend. And a lot of the coverage that comes from Dawg Nation is stuff that I read all the time and is super valuable. I appreciate that the AJC realized the need to have a whole special edition, not just of the sports page, but a whole special thing just called Dawg Nation to cover Georgia football. And I think that, or Georgia athletics in general, but primarily Georgia football. So, anyway, this is just part of the history, and it's part of something we get to glom onto because, you may lose this game, but you can still say, hey, we made the SEC championship game for the 13th time. We tied Florida's record, or now we've been there the second most times. So when in the history of the SEC championship game, and we are only the second team ever to go to 5 straight SEC championship games. And on that context, let me say, talking about Kirby, and I'm sure you've heard this thrown out a lot, Kirby, of course, in his first year was just getting going, and Georgia did not have an elite record in 2016, but this will be now the 8th time in 10 seasons that Kirby Smart has led the Georgia Bulldogs to the SEC championship game. So just the COVID season, the 2020 COVID season, which was not Georgia's best season among the Kirby seasons that we've had, we went 8-2 that year, but didn't make the SEC championship game. Florida beat us in the game. We lost to Florida and Alabama in the regular season, and those two teams met in the SEC championship game. But it's still just quite a remarkable run to be 8 of 9 times in the SEC championship game. Watching this game get formed, wanting to be a part of the elite of the conference and the elite of college football in general as a Georgia fan, when this game was formed in 1992, it was painstaking to watch it go by 10 years and see Auburn and Tennessee and Alabama and Florida, especially Florida, Alabama, or Florida, Auburn, Tennessee, some of our most hated rivals playing in the game each year, and we're just sitting on the sidelines missing out. So, and I think it's also impressive. I was talking about the division era. It's impressive what Kirby's able to do now that we're moving past. This is our second year now where we've made the game outside of the division era. And like I was just referencing back, like Arkansas back in 2002, sometimes the way the conference aligns and the things work out, the team that makes it from one division or another is not necessarily all that good a team, or not one of the, maybe not even one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the conference, much less than the first or second best team. Well, now we pretty much are picking from the first and second best teams. Now, of course, this year we ended up with sort of a 4-way tie at the top. Texas A&M was 7-1, Georgia was 7-1, Alabama was 7-1, and Ole Miss was 7-1. So with no head-to-head matchups that settled the affair, you end up looking at we made the game as a result of looking at the cumulative record of our conference opponents. And our conference opponent record was much stronger than Texas A&M and Ole Miss. They were eliminated. Texas A&M's conference record of their opponents wasn't even 30%. I mean, it was less than a 300% winning percentage. So, and again, that's just an example how things worked out. Texas A&M played their SEC schedule, no fault to them. They went on the road and beat Notre Dame, who keeps getting a lot of love in all the polls and rankings. And so that was definitely an impressive win. But they managed to avoid playing Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, all the other top teams in the conference. In fact, they didn't play, I've heard it said, and I didn't verify this or double check it, but I've heard it said they didn't play any of the top 8 teams in the conference by record. So again, doesn't mean they're phony, doesn't mean they're not a good team. They are. Their strength of schedule overall, and a lot to be said about just playing the conference record. But they did have the advantage of not having to face all these other teams. And maybe that's part of what showed up. Doesn't mean they're definitely going to lose as soon as they play a better team. But Texas was probably the most challenging, or one of the most challenging games they played on the season. And when they played Texas on the road, they lost. And in some ways, it may even be, sometimes we think it does you a lot of good to play some tough games so that you have better preparation. So, Another thing we're looking for as we head into this game, Georgia can win this game. It'll be their 16th SEC championship, which would just strengthens Georgia's lead on second place all time. Tennessee is in second place right now. Georgia has 15 SEC championships. Alabama has 30, and they're in first place. But Tennessee has 13. LSU has 12, and Florida and Auburn each have 8, and Ole Miss, actually, way back from the different eras, has 6 SEC championships. So if Georgia can win the game on Saturday, it'll be the 16th SEC championship. That'll give us a 3-game lead on Tennessee, and that'll give us sort of another little piece of history that we should be able to hold on to for a while. Tennessee would have to make and win 3 consecutive SEC championship games just to tie us from this point. So, all right, listen, we're at the end of quarter 1, and we've dug into a little bit of the history of SEC championship game, and we're going to get a little bit more into what this specifically means to Georgia when we come right back in quarter 2. So we're just going to take a very brief break, and then we'll be right back for quarter 2. So please join us for quarter 2 of episode 53 of the Daily Dawg podcast. This is Wednesday, December 3rd, and this is Beat Bama Week SEC Championship version. So go Dogs. Welcome back to the Daily Dawg. This is quarter 2 of episode 53 of the Daily Dawg podcast, Wednesday, December 3rd. We're in Beat Bama Week championship style, or second Beat Bama Week of the year. Unfortunately, the best we can do is go 1 for 1 in Beat Bama Weeks because we lost the first one. But we are looking for the comeback, and this is the best opportunity to right a wrong from last season. You don't have to wait till a further season or sometime in the future. We can turn around right now and correct the one mistake of the season that we had, losing the one game, and go ahead and beat Bama. And so here in the second quarter, we talked a little bit about championship game history, SEC championship game history, Georgia's history a little bit with it, and just a little perspective on the championship game. Now what we want to do is take a look at a little deeper, what does this game specifically mean to Georgia? What could it mean to Georgia? And what are we looking for from this game? I mean, obviously, we want to win. What would it mean if we win? We'd mean we're SEC champion. And like I said, we would be SEC champion for the 16th time, which would just lengthen our lead on second all-time in SEC championship history, as we are currently have 15 championships versus Tennessee in third place with 13, and then LSU right behind them with 12. So it'd be nice to get just lengthen that lead a little bit. Like I said, if we were able to win this game, Tennessee would have to get in the game 3 years in a row and win it 3 years in a row just to tie us. So we'd have a pretty strong lock on second place. One thing I wanted to get in quarter 1, I forgot to mention, I thought this was a good time to also reflect, by the way, on where the SEC championship game, or the media days. I had pulled up and just happened to look, or when I was looking up SEC championship game history, and I was reminded of what the SEC media at SEC media days back in the summer voted, and they thought would happen this year. So it's just worth noting that the overwhelming majority of SEC media personalities thought that Texas was going to win the league this year. They got 96 votes as SEC champion for this 2025 season. Georgia was second with 44 votes, Alabama third, LSU fourth, South Carolina fifth, Florida, Vanderbilt, Auburn, Ole Miss, Tennessee. That's the order in which people got votes. So, in fact, the predicted order of finish in the SEC was Texas number 1, Georgia 2, Alabama 3, LSU 4, South Carolina 5, Florida 6, Ole Miss 7, Texas A&M 8, Tennessee 9, Oklahoma 10. You get the idea. We'll stop there. So, obviously, Georgia, Alabama finished 1 and 2 in the SEC race this year, although Texas A&M and Ole Miss were tied, lost out on the tiebreakers. Texas was behind, and LSU was off the chart. South Carolina was off the chart. Florida was off the chart. So, and Oklahoma, which the media had picked as 10th, squeezes into just missing out and looking to be into a playoff position. So just a little reflection on what we get from the media. One of the things I think is funny on this whole season, there's just been obviously a lot of discussion about the good of the playoff system and bringing more teams into the fold and opening up the whole of college football, opening up a little bit more so more teams have a chance, and there's more I guess just more teams invested towards the end of the season with an opportunity to get into the 12-team playoff. Still, in almost all conferences, you're only going to have 2 teams in the conference. But again, you're not limited in the division anymore. You keep fighting to the end. It's possible, a lot of times when you had a team like, let's say, let's say Ole Miss was in the same division with us this year. We go 7-1, they go 7-1, and we beat them. Well, they could see down the stretch each time we win, and we get closer to finishing our SEC record and only having the one loss, but we beat them, and our loss, say, came in the other division to Alabama. Let's say if that's how the divisions were set up. I know that's not how they used to be, but let's just say it was that way. You look at it this way. That sort of does keep them out of the game a little bit, right? And I know that frustration. We had that frustration as Georgia fans. We were consistently losing the Florida game for much of the early years of the SEC championship game and the division setup. And losing that game consistently put us in a situation where even if we were matching Florida in record overall, we're sitting there waiting for them or hoping for them to lose other games. It's out of our control. So in this scenario, we got down to the last weekend. This is the first time this has happened, right? Last year, it was actually settled pretty early with Georgia and Texas, or at least the Georgia side of it was. I don't remember when for sure Texas locked up. Actually, Texas might have locked up even earlier in Georgia. So, but it didn't come down to the last weekend. But this year, we go into the final week of the season waiting for the results in some of the games before we knew. And of course, Georgia had already wrapped up its SEC schedule, was playing Georgia Tech. But again, who's going to get in the game was going to depend on how Texas and Texas A&M game went, and how the the Iron Bowl went. So how the Ole Miss game went. So, those were, that made for interesting times, made for an interesting weekend. We had to sit on Friday and Saturday and watch all these games go by before we knew what would happen. And it was interesting. Georgia played our game at 3:30 on Friday after Thanksgiving, and we won. But again, that had no bearing on the SEC because we were playing an out-of-conference game against Tech. But then later that night, I'm watching a movie or doing something with my family, and it comes across, hey, Texas A&M has lost to Texas. And it's like, oh, okay, now we're in the SEC championship game. We knew that was one of the things that was going to happen. Then we had to wait a whole nother 24 hours, basically, till Alabama and Auburn finished playing to find out who we're going to play. Was it going to be Texas A&M, or was it going to be Alabama, or was it going to be Ole Miss? So those were the options there. So anyway, what this game means to us, I think, there was a lot of consternation. A lot of people, a lot of Georgia fans have been saying, look, I don't want to play this game. And I get that. And we've talked about that in earlier podcasts. Certainly when you look at what happened last year, we won the game. We beat Texas. We lost our starting quarterback in the game. And then we beat Texas. We get almost 4 weeks off before we get to our next game, thanks to the bye. So every other team that is coming forward has played a game already. And so we've been sort of sitting and resting. So on one level, you think, okay, you're getting rest. But on another level, maybe you're not fresh. Maybe you're not in game shape. Maybe you just can't simulate it. It's like you've started the season all over again, and they've had a head start on you because the team coming in just played a game. And that certainly seems to be one of the things that people talked about, because all of the seeded teams with the byes lost, like we talked about. And so Georgia was in maybe a weaker position. We played the SEC championship game, then we had a long layoff. We lost our starting quarterback in that game. And then by the time we get to the playoff, we're just not in the best circumstance. So maybe this isn't what we want. And certainly this year, part of me, I have to admit, when I found out that Texas A&M had lost, I was a little bit disappointed, because mostly I just settled into the idea that we needed other people. I guess the thing is when we control our destiny, then I think we have a pretty good shot. And I count on our team, our coaching staff, and think, hey, they'll get this done. We didn't control our destiny. And so the idea that it was, I thought, well, maybe A&M will rise up and beat Texas. I know that they were the better team on paper coming in, and Texas hadn't had as good a season, but of course, A&M hasn't beaten Texas in forever. And that trend continued. And, Auburn just almost had a shot at Alabama, wasn't able to pull it off. So, we could have had a couple different things. And in that scenario, I definitely wouldn't want to play Ole Miss for our, and I'm sure Alabama feels this way about playing us. For us, playing Ole Miss would have been very little value. We'd already beaten Ole Miss. We already got all the value we're going to get out of that. Beating them a second time wouldn't help us that much. So in this case, for us, this is a big value. Our only loss of the year is to Alabama, and this Alabama thing has become a big monkey on our back, right? We have lost 10 of the last 11 to Alabama. And so that's a really, really bad trend and one we want to reverse. And that goes back beyond the Kirby Smart era, but even Kirby, who has been Superman against, you look at his record and, again, I've talked about it in the last podcast or two, we now have 8 wins in a row over Auburn. We now have 9 wins in a row over Tennessee. We have 5 wins in a row over Florida, now 8 wins in a row over Georgia Tech. Kirby is handling business against Georgia's longtime rivals, right? And he's handling business in general. We're 37-3 in the SEC in the last 3 seasons. That's a stat. Again, this isn't just like, we went 6-2 and won some tiebreakers and got into the SEC championship game. You got 3 losses total in the last, 3 years of SEC play. It's just a dominant run. Or actually, that maybe is beyond now I think about it. I added that up, but I think that goes back to the 2021 season. That's more than 3 years of play. Of course it is, because we only play 8 conference games a year, so it has to be more than that. So anyway, but Kirby so far is only 1-7 against Alabama. So now the one was huge. It was big, okay, and it was for all the marbles. It was the national championship, and it was this setup too, right? It was the comeback game, right? It was the next. We lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game that year, but both of us made the playoff. We end up in the championship game, and this time we won the big one. And again, kind of created this opportunity where for the first time you really start to see the SEC championship and the SEC championship game diminished because even of the 4-team playoff, right? Because sure, we would have loved to win the SEC championship that year, but I think all of us feel like we got the better end of that trade. If that was the way it was going to go, hey, you're in the SEC championship game, you can take the win against Alabama and you may or may not have a chance to win the national championship, or you can lose against Alabama in the SEC championship and you will win the national championship. Everybody, I think we all desperate for the national championship for that first time in 41 years. I think we all would have got behind that trade, right? But immediately it just shows you that the playoff and the national championship drive is de-emphasizing the traditional nature of the college football schedule, conference and conference championships. And, that was one place you really saw it. But so sure, we would trade it. And I think we all felt like we got the better end of that deal for sure, that, hey, they won the SEC championship. We beat them in the national championship. We got the last laugh, right? Over here, if you're on the video podcast, you can see right here by this lamp, that's the picture of Keely Ringo completing his run into the end zone and for the touchdown that just, the game was already probably settled, but that just made it more fun and beyond reason. So a great moment, and one I enjoy looking at that picture all the time and thinking about that moment and how much just utter joy it brought to my life after all the years of waiting for a championship. So 1-7 so far for Kirby, right? So, and so this sets up like the last time we lost the regular season matchup. And this is also very similar to the last time that we had a rematch as well. We lost the regular season matchup in the 2017 season to Auburn when we were ranked number 1. And, that was one of the first times we had ascended to number 1. So it was a big deal. You didn't know at that point that Georgia was going to be number 1, each of the next several seasons and win 2 national championships. You just saw us ascending at that moment and you said, wow, we're number 1. We get to number 1, boom, we go to Auburn and they beat us, right? And so that was just horrible. But then Auburn gets into because they then also went on to beat Alabama, who ascended to number one after us. They beat Alabama. Auburn gets back into the SEC championship game. And in the rematch, despite the fact they beat us like a drum in the first game, we turn around and beat them like a drum in the second game. So far these rematch games, historically, in the last 10 years in the Kirby Smart era, have gone Georgia's way. So that's a little something to hang our hat on, and hopefully it is. But even if we win this game, it'll just be 2 out of 12, right? And these games have been really interesting. Of the Kirby Smart games, so again, so we've lost 10 out of 11. So this will be the 12th game since 2008. But if we narrow it down to the 2016-17 seasons going forward, when Kirby started, again, Kirby is 1-7, so this will be his 9th opportunity against Alabama. 3 of these games have been regular season. 5. This will be the 5th one for the SEC championship game, and 2 of them were for the national championship, and we went 1-1 in those. But so far we're 0-4 in the previous SEC championship matchups. So we need this in the program. We need to of course, we just need to get the monkey off our back in beating Alabama. We need to win an SEC championship in the SEC championship game over Alabama. Kirby needs to take a step forward. Even with this win, he'd only be 2-7 against Alabama. But it'd be 2 big ones, one for an SEC championship and one for a national championship. So that's a pretty good record. It would move us, if you look at the last, this would be, if you go all the way back to when we won 3 in a row against Alabama back in 2002, 2003, and then 2007, before we started this streak of losing 10 of 11, which started in 2008 loss in the home game in 2008. If we win this one, then we'd be 5-10 in the last 15 against Alabama. There's just no way to sugarcoat it. That's not great. But I think the other thing that would be huge here with winning this game is what it'll do for where we go from here in the season, what this would mean to this team going forward. Obviously, it's getting the Alabama monkey off the back, but we're going to go ahead and take our break here. We're at the end of quarter 2, so technically halftime of episode 53 of the Daily Dawg. This will just be the short break, and then we'll bounce right back, and we'll pick this discussion up in quarter 3, where we'll talk about what will this game do if we can win this game, and where does it put us beyond just the numbers we've talked about so far. And then also we're going to start in quarter 3 getting into our team comparisons a little bit and talk about what we think is coming on with these teams, or how these teams are coming together as they come to this game since having played in week 4. So come right back. We'll be back in just a moment for quarter 3 of the Daily Dawg, episode 53, Wednesday, December 3rd. This is Beat Bama Week Championship version. So go Dogs. Welcome back to the Daily Dawg podcast. This is quarter 3 of episode 53, our Wednesday, December 3rd podcast. This is week 15 of the 2025 college football season, and a week we didn't know for sure we'd be playing, but we are. We've got a game, and that's because we're in the SEC championship game against Alabama. So this is Beat Bama week, and this is our second Beat Bama week of the year. Hopefully this one works out. So we were just going over in quarter 2 what we're kind of looking, or what this game could mean to Georgia. So we were talking about, we've already kind of gone through the history, what it would mean in terms of winning an SEC championship. Where does that put us? We've talked about how many times we've been in the game. We talked about where Kirby is, even, that while the losses to Alabama extend beyond Kirby's era, the Kirby era, which has been fantastic in every other aspect, has only lacking in one way at all. And anything you could at all point to that's basically less than the greatest you can imagine, and that's that even Kirby is only 1-7 so far against Alabama. So even if he wins this game, he could move to 2-7. He would, however, have the two wins would have been epic wins. They would have been for a national championship in 2021, and they would have been for the SEC championship this year. And while we have beaten Bama, we're 1-1 in national championship games against Alabama. So far, we're 0-4 in the Kirby Smart era against, or in any era really, against Alabama in SEC championship games. I mentioned our record in SEC championship games, that this will be our 13th SEC championship game, tying Florida. We've also tied Florida for being the only team in SEC championship game history to go to 5 SEC championship games in a row, and this is 8 of the last 9 games played that Georgia has been a participant under, and that's under Kirby Smart. Only missing out, Kirby so far having only missed in his first season, which was an 8-5 season as he was getting going, and then in the COVID era season where we went 8-2, and our 2 losses being to Alabama and Florida, who were the SEC championship game participants that year. So, but we're talking a little bit more. So that's all sort of the numbers and the raw numbers. What would this game mean, or what do I think it would mean? Where do I think it is? Well, first and foremost, I think we all feel, I'm sure the players, I'm sure the coaches, and I know as fans, I think we all feel that we need to get this monkey off our back, the Alabama monkey. I heard somebody refer to it, I think maybe it was Brandon Adams on his podcast, the silverback. But it's a huge, it's the elephant that's not in the room, but it's on our back, on top of the elephant, or on top of the monkey, whatever. I'm not doing a good job with my analogies there, but you get the idea. This thing has just been weighing on us, and this would be an amazing and excellent opportunity to take advantage of it, right? While you're not turning around the whole series. Like I said, the best in quarter 2, I think I mentioned the best framework I could put on this is if you go all the way back to 2003. We had a 3-game win streak against Alabama in our 2002, 2003, and 2007 seasons. So there's a couple seasons, obviously, we didn't play in there. And so we played back-to-back in 2002 and 2003. And then we played a home and away in 2007 and 2008. And we lost the home game in 2008, and that was a very embarrassing game. That was a blackout game that ended Georgia's tradition of getting hyped and fired up about wearing the black jerseys, because that game was such an ugly beatdown and went so poorly. So, and that's in a season, where we had started the season as a preseason number 1, and then had already fallen to number 3 by the time we played Alabama in the first quarter or so of the season, because we had already performed we'd won, but performed poorly. So we're still undefeated, and game day came to town and all that stuff. And it was just embarrassing. We got our butts kicked, and that's really continued. That was the beginning of this slide against Alabama. So obviously that precedes Kirby Smart. But that was a tough era, and or it's been a tough era so far. So obviously, what I guess I was going to say is, if you take those 3 wins in a row and you put them with our 1 win in the SEC or the national championship game in Indianapolis for the 2022 championship, and then if we could win this time, now you could say, well, we've won 5 of the last 10, and that's the best spin you could put on it. So, but this one would be huge, right? Because it'd be finally winning an SEC championship game. It'd be finally beating Alabama directly for an SEC championship. And more than that, I think this is it's an opportunity in a couple ways. First of all, as you know, the way I talk about the history and everything of our team, not just the results from any one season, but the big picture history. I guess this is in this season. This is an opportunity to turn around and sort of redeem the one loss we have on the year, right? That's our one flaw so far this season is, and again, people I don't think thought of us as that kind of a dominant team. The season didn't start out with people. We started as number 5. We'd been starting at 1, 2, or 3 every year for the previous 4 years. But this year we start down at number 5 and kind of, hey, here's the 2 or 3 or 4 teams that are truly the elite for national championship. And of course they were wrong about that. They put Texas up there, right? So obviously Texas didn't survive that, and certainly didn't survive us. But that was the perception coming in, is Georgia's the next best, or the best of the rest, if you would say, right? We got Ohio State, we got Texas, we got a couple of these other teams up here. Penn State was in there. Obviously, those were wrong. So Texas and Penn State were both huge misses by everybody, but that was the perception coming in. And so the perception was Georgia's now, after a 4-year dominant run where we had them 1, 2, or 3, and they were an odds-on favorite to win the championship. Coming in this year, we were second in our own conference. Like I said before, the SEC media picked us a distant second. We had half as many votes as Texas as SEC champion. And then the national media said, look, Georgia's still a great and elite team, and they got a ton of talent, but we don't think they're championship level this year. So they put us at 5th. And, we lost ground as the season started. I mean, because, yes, we only lost the one game to Alabama, but the perception was that Georgia was not a very complete team, that the defense looked leaky, and it was particularly alarming. I think it got more play because of how good the Georgia defense has been under Kirby Smart over the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years. So I think when you saw, Tennessee be able to put up 21 first quarter points and 500 yards in the game, and overall Alabama did not actually dominate so much statistically. They didn't even get 400 yards in the game, but what everybody saw was on their first 2 drives, they got up 14-0, and they were 8 for 8 on their on third down conversion. So Georgia just didn't look like we were able to provide the kind of resistance and dominance that we're used to seeing on defense. Now, all of a sudden, we're seeing that down the stretch here in the season, and it's turned around. But coming into the season, and for the first quarter of the season and maybe the first half of the season, the perception was that Georgia's starting slow, not really a complete team, not as powerful as what we've seen in the past, still very talented. But that perception has really changed in the last 4 or 5 games, right? As Georgia is rounding out to show that they could do a lot more. But there's still a little bit of a sense that we are the underdog. Okay, we are up to number 3 in this week's playoff poll released tonight. On Tuesday night, we are number 3. We would be the 3rd seed if the playoffs started today, but we do have to go through these conference championship games, and we'll see where that gets us. But so all of a sudden, we are back in that elite group, and we've kind of just pecked our way up. And this is our highest ranking of the season, by the way. We had been up to 3 in the coaches poll, but as far as the AP poll, and certainly the playoff poll only starts back at the 1st of November, so there hadn't been that many rankings. But just looking at the AP poll, we're number 3 in the AP poll now too, and that's the highest we've been so far this season. So I think that this team believes that it can do a lot. I think it believes in itself. I think they play together. We've said all season about the fire, the passion, the energy, the FPE, and they certainly have that. They've showed that you cannot kill them, that that they're the team that just won't go away. And now they've kind of converted from the team that won't go away to the team that can just do what Georgia teams in the last 5 years have done, which is just pick you up and beat you and throw you around like a rag doll. And that's what we did against Texas. But again, it took a while against Texas. This whole concept of slow starts or whatever, we didn't start slow against Texas. We were pretty even keel, and we led early in the game, and then we kind of held that lead. Texas got close. They got it to a 4, but it was 14-10 going into the 4th quarter. But then Georgia does what really has been Georgia's patented MO in games, which is not necessarily always to start in the 1st or the 2nd or the 3rd. This year, the motto or the mantra has been a little bit that Georgia has been never is losing the second half, and definitely not the 4th quarter. And we had the same thing. We had a 17. So you look at 2 of our bigger games this year. Ole Miss at home was we had a 17 to nothing beatdown in the 4th quarter against Ole Miss that created that reversed a 9-point deficit and turned it into an 8-point win. Then you had a 14-10 game with Texas on the road against at home against Texas as well. I'm sorry, we were on the road last year. And same thing, Georgia turned that around and turned it into a 21-0 beatdown in the 4th quarter. So the idea that Kirby and the team has put out there that nobody beats us in the 4th quarter, we're definitely seeing that. The conditioning, the fire, passion, energy, all that's come together. But also another trait that's been true of Kirby Smart teams, especially these last 5 years, is that there seems to be, in the biggest games, in the best moments, and when Georgia has really just created that wow moment. It's been usually just an onslaught like that, whether it's in the second quarter. You think back one or two of the Florida games in those last 5 games that we've won in a row. There's been one or two of those. I remember the one, I don't remember which year it was. I talked about this earlier in the season, but the one where I think we were up 7-3, and then in the final 2 minutes of the quarter, I think we scored 3 touchdowns or 2 touchdowns and a field goal, and we ended up like 28-3 at the half or 24-3. I mean, just in a span of 2 minutes at the end of the half, we scored. Nakobe Dean intercepted a pass and ran it back for a touchdown. We created a fumble against their quarterback. The guy who went, I can't think of his name all of a sudden, I apologize, but he went, as a top draft pick, despite the fact that he never was able to win any big games in college. But people, couldn't get over, the intangibles of how big and athletic he was, right? But we were able to, he was trying to just run the ball and get a first down and run out the clock, and we stripped the ball from him, fumble again, we put it right in the end zone. So just that's what Georgia has been able to do so many times, and we saw it against Texas a couple weeks ago, where we just all of a sudden just, and Kirby helped contribute to that with some coaching decisions. So it's not always just the player. Sometimes it's the coaching. But we've made those choices and just put the game away. And just sometimes it's breathtaking to watch what they do in spurts. Rarely have you actually seen Georgia just come out and, obviously if you won 21-0 every quarter, then, that would be, 82-0 game. So you don't see that hardly for anybody often. So that's not what we're talking about. So what does this mean? What would this mean? What this would mean for Georgia, I think, is getting the Alabama monkey off the back right here, winning the SEC championship. I think it would just complete the puzzle of the transition from this being sort of a young and inexperienced team and a team that didn't look like a typical Georgia team, and there was a lot of criticism from both fans and the media saying, hey, this is not the Georgia we've been used to. This is still a good team, but it's not the team you've been expecting. So all of a sudden, we could look at this and say, look, we complete this transition over the season that we saw the improvement, week after week. We saw us go on the road against a respected Mississippi State team and just beat them down. And then we beat down Texas 35-10. We handled business in our, tune-up game, and then we played Tech. And while we were not dominant against Tech, we showed that sort of championship quality of not being limited in how we can beat a team. Our offense could actually have a terrible day, and our defense could rise up and be so good that we could beat a top 10 offensive team. We could hold them to under 10 points and still win a game in which we only generated 260 yards of offense and 16 points, because our defense could rise up on that side and our special teams could rise up and just be so good that we could still win that game, and generally have led throughout the game, controlled the game. So if we can take that into this game this week, and we could not knock off, because technically right now, although ESPN's matchup predictor gives Alabama a 51-49% edge in winning, the potential of winning the game, the Vegas line has been 2.5. It opened about 2.5 and just seems to be steadily sitting at Georgia as a favorite at 2.5. I don't take a lot of comfort in that, because as you know, we've been a favorite, I think, in 4 of the last 5 or all of the last games against Alabama since the 2022-2021 season, and that has only worked out the one time. So, but this is a moment. We sort of have that history on our side. Bama didn't beat us twice, didn't win the rematch the last time we did it. Auburn, the last time we lost a regular season game and then came back and played for a championship, SEC championship, Auburn couldn't win that, so we have some precedent to that. And I think that this win, if we can get this win, whatever kind of win it is, I don't think it has to be an emphatic win. I just think it has to be a win. We just have to get past Alabama, claim the SEC championship over Alabama, watch them lose on the field and us win, and the confetti comes down. And I think if we do that, that completes this transition of this team growing into the kind of Georgia championship team we've come to expect, and sort of taking the only question mark out there, like, hey, could they beat Bama? Well, yeah, we could beat Bama. And I think if they have the springboard to go into into the playoffs with the knowledge that, yes, we can beat Bama. We can beat anybody. We can't kill us. We can come back. Even if we're down, we can come back. Doesn't matter how big the deficit. It doesn't matter who we're playing. Even Alabama, we can win. I think that would be a tremendous springboard, and it would really sort of set up the idea for me that I would really be fired up that, hey, this isn't just a chance. Like, this is a championship team. Now, there's other teams out there, and we'll talk about the matchups, and we'll start getting into that too. But right now, it's really about focus on beat Bama, right? So that's where we are. Listen, we're a little over time in quarter three, so we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about that perspective of what else is going on in the playoff and where we are, or seeding what we want. I talked about getting into some comparisons of the teams, but we're running a little short on that time, and we are going to do a full breakdown, stats breakdown of the teams as we round our way towards maybe a Thursday, but definitely the Friday podcast that will have our predictions and our breakdowns and go through the matchups and everything and where they are. So, but if we can get to some of that matchup and just do a little preview of it, we'll do it here in the fourth quarter. But we got a little bit more to talk about the SEC championship game and the playoff and what we're looking at and what's going to happen here. But that's my take for now. Is I'm kind of, the more I've been thinking about this, the more I realize the opportunity not just to beat Bama and sort of avenge the loss from this season, not just to beat Bama and get the monkey off our back that we can't beat Bama lately, but just the way it's a perfect setup to springboard us into the championship run, where this team would have all the confidence in the world that it's really done everything, and maybe even something that other great Georgia teams before it have not been able to do recently. So I think it is actually a good setup, and I think we should be excited, and I think this is a tremendous opportunity, and the more I think about it, the more excited I'm getting, and I hope you join me with that. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back for quarter four. Until that short break is over, go Dogs. Welcome back to the Daily Dawg Podcast, episode 53. This is quarter four of our podcast for Wednesday, December 3rd. So this is championship week. This is Beat Bama week. This is week 15 of the 2025 college football season. So we have the opportunity, as we've been discussing, to take on Alabama and correct our one loss of the season, a 3-point loss at home. This time, of course, we'll be back in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, playing for the second week in a row in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And that's becoming a little bit of a tradition for the Georgia football team. Multiple games, sometimes back-to-back games in Mercedes-Benz. Excuse me. Unfortunately, while Georgia is really good at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and this last week was the first time we got to see Georgia and Georgia Tech play in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and that was fun and exciting. But while we've been very good against everybody at Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the most part, except for Alabama. In fact, our one win over Alabama in our last 11 meetings was the 2021 national championship game, which was in Indianapolis. So part of me was sitting around this week thinking, gee, I wish we could move the SEC championship game to Indianapolis. Things seemed to go great when we played there, but when we played in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, it has not been quite as happy a moment for us. But we're hoping to reverse that this time. And like we said in quarter three, I think that the more I've thought about it, and people have asked me, some of you guys have asked me, some other friends and fans, people have reached out and said, well, what do you think? Do we want to play in the SEC championship game? Would we be better off had we missed it and had the bye? And we've talked about how the bye worked last year. not just for Georgia, but for all the teams that had the bye, all the teams that had the home playoff game. And so for a while there, when Georgia first was working its way up into the championship rankings, and we were in that fifth position, that really looked like sort of a sweet spot, right? Where you say, look, we can just go ahead and take this SEC championship thing off, have about 3 weeks off. We'll get a fun home game against probably a group of 5 champion, Tulane, Navy, whoever the flavor of the day is. Right now, it looks like we're looking at the American Conference Championship is probably the winner of that. Could be the team that makes it, the North Texas and Tulane. Excuse me, I'm still... Hopefully that corrected that. I apologize for this ugliness, and suddenly a furry something jumped into my throat. Anyway, so yeah, so the fifth seed seems like a cherry position, right? And even if we ended up with the fifth seed now, let's say we lose the SEC championship game and we fall into the fifth seed, that still seems to be a good position. We get a chance to have a warm-up game at home against an overmatched opponent, get a little momentum, and then springboard against one of those seeded teams. But in this case, we'd have the disadvantage of we'll have played an extra game. If we end up in one of those home playoff games as the fifth seed, for instance, even though that's a desirable place, we'll play this SEC championship game before. So it's the SEC championship game in our world will have ended up on one hand looking a little bit like an unnecessary game, right? A game that we went and played, lost, we got nothing from it. We didn't win an SEC championship. We didn't improve our seeding. In fact, we lost our seeding. In the end, we got a fairly favorable seeding if we came out fifth, we would think, and a pretty good setup for the playoff, except for we had expended one more game. And who knows what happens in one more game? You know, we played Georgia Tech last week, and now all of a sudden our starting center is hurt, and we're not sure what the long-term consequence of that's going to be, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to see him in this game against Alabama, and that's a crucial moment unless I missed something. And I admittedly hadn't looked up what the status of Drew Bobo was, but all the early things I read were pointing to, and in listening to people talk about, were pointing to the idea that we may not see Drew Bobo again this year, regardless of how long the playoff goes. And that's looking at the idea that, you know, our first playoff game, if we didn't have a bye, would be December 19th, December 20th. So this is just December 3rd. So that's still, 2-3 weeks away. And if we end up with one of the top 4 seeds in a bye, then we're not going to play until December 29th December 30th or January 1st, I think, somewhere in there. Those are the timing for the New Year's Day games would be when the top 4 seeded teams will be in action. So, that would give us almost 30 days from now. So the idea that Bobo is being talked about as possibly out for the season when the next or the most critical game coming up could be 30 days away, a little disappointing. I'm hoping that whatever it is, he could be back in time. But and just as a side note, I think that we have to assume that at least part of our offensive problem, you never want to think that your offense is going to come to a stop or stutter out with just one person going out. And a lot of times when you think about one person going out, you think about it being your quarterback or your star running back, dragging down your offense. But one of the big keys, in addition to how well Gunnar Stock, really everybody, I mean, we've talked about it before. Look, Zachariah Branch has stepped up and become a big-time receiver. He's now leading the conference, by the way, if you didn't know that, in receptions. Not so much in terms of yards or yards per catch, but he has been a workhorse as far as putting in the receptions and getting tough yards for us, big first downs and big moments in the game. And he has been that guy that we've, and it's really the first time since we lost Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers where we've had some receivers who've done well. We've done, Arian Smith did a good job for us last year. Colby Young was doing a great job for us this year. Other guys have done a nice job for us this year, like London Humphreys, and our tight ends, Lawson Lucky and Oscar Delp have had some big moments. We've all been waiting for those tight ends to kind of explode. We've seen some wide receivers step up over the last 2 years and have some good moments, but hasn't really been a player since Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers left on the receiving side, where you felt like whenever we have to have a play, whenever a big moment must happen, who's that guy? where's Zachariah Branch? That's what you think now. And so often that's what's happened. He had the lone touchdown in the game. And again, it wasn't just like, oh, he ran in the end zone and Gunnar hit him. Gunnar hit him short of the end zone. He has to make a guy miss to avoid being tackled well short of the end zone. He makes that guy miss, makes him look foolish, and then he trots into the end zone. So he has a huge, 23, 24-yard catch late in the first half that helps us get out of our own side of the field, and late in the second half, I'm sorry. So he had big plays in this game, and he's had big, memorable plays throughout the season. So, this is one of the ways our offense has emerged. Obviously, Nate Frazier's had big plays and been dominant. Chauncey Bowens has also had big plays when healthy. The tight ends, as I mentioned, have had big plays. But the other big feature of what's really come together is our offense has looked stronger, Gunnar has looked better, and the whole thing has come together as our offensive line has come together. And what we see now is we knew we had a bunch of young guys, but were they talented? Georgia has had a lot of talent on the offensive line going back to the beginning of the Kirby Smart era. Sam Pittman, when he was still at Georgia, began that process of bringing in top level, 5-star recruits that we had not seen before, high 4-stars and 5-star recruits on the offensive line. And maybe in history, Georgia had one of those, like when we had a Stinchcomb on the line, when we had two of them, but not necessarily at the same time. And there's a couple other guys I can remember, some big time guys, maybe one at a time, where Georgia had a top NFL future offensive lineman, but not 3 or 4 or 5. They haven't all necessarily gone in the same season, but over the last 10 years, you've seen where Georgia football has been putting, 3 or 4 guys off of its offensive line in the pros every 2 or 3 years or less. So, so the question is, are these young guys who haven't had as much playing time and as much experience, we've finally gotten to the point where we rotated so many people through and out and off to the pros and out of eligibility that you really only had a couple guys, Micah Morris and Ernest Green, that had considerable starting time on the offensive line. But you saw a lot of guys like Bo Hewley and Gaston, guys like that who were stepping up and say these guys could be really good. And Drew Bobo has been part of that process. He's the center is always sort of the leader of the batch, and he's been doing a great job holding that line together. And Gunnar obviously has a lot of confidence in him. So when he goes out of the game, I think Gunnar's confidence is already a little bit shaken because of that interception he threw. Tech was doing some different things on defense that we haven't seen. And so they had a good plan. But he also just missed some open reads, and I think, he lost a little bit of his confidence, and we have to probably attribute at least some of that to losing Bobo. So as we go to this game this week, at least we have all week to get ready for it, but this isn't the game going against a high-level defense like Alabama where you'd say, well, that's fine, we'll just swap out our center. But overall, I think, we talked about in the last quarter that this game could really springboard us. We can win this game, we get the Alabama monkey off our back, and we go into the playoffs with all the momentum in the world. And I think you'll see all the other teams out there look at Georgia and say, that's a team we don't want to play. A lot of people have been saying that's already true. You look at Georgia and you say, hey, Georgia's coming on, nobody's going to want to play them. We've already got that reputation of you can't kill us. Now we're starting to be able to go out there and assert our will like we did against Texas. Now we're able to see our defense coming up and playing at an elite level like it has the last 3-4 games, especially this last week against Georgia Tech, and a high level offense that we were just able to completely shut down. And so you put that together, if we can put it all together and eke out a win or beat down a win, whichever it is, against Alabama this week, then I think the catharsis and the confidence that come together from those two things are a huge springboard going into the SEC championship. So, going into the playoffs. But it does make me sad. One of the things, this whole discussion and this question that people have been asking, should we be in this game? I think this points to the degradation. Those people who are excited, who say, wow, look, I've heard people talk about, look, there was 24 teams alive for the playoff coming into the last week of the season. This is great. Look how many teams are involved. That's one side of the coin. Okay, yes, more teams, I guess, have excitement. More teams have a chance to be looking at the end of the season and say, hey, maybe I can make the playoff. And that's true. But realistically, like I've said before, I've made this comment. Look, I feel like a lot of these lower level teams, when you get down to 10, 11, 12 seeds, you're looking at charity cases. Even Ohio State last year technically was a charity case. I've made this point before. Ohio State's championship team last year would never have had an opportunity to be a champion in any form of college football that had ever existed, from the bowl and poll era all the way through the 4-team playoff. That team would have been excluded from the top four, from an elite bowl, from a poll situation where they would have got voted in after the bowl games. Any version of college football championship that we've ever heard of or seen, the last year's Ohio State team wouldn't have had a chance. So they even are, I mean, were they a worthy team? Do I think they didn't deserve it? I mean, they were worthy in the sense that they were clearly a team that, by losing twice, losing to Michigan, by not making their conference championship game, much like Miami this year, they had failed to live up to expectations. They were a disappointment. That's why there was so much grumbling about their situation going into the playoffs, where Kirk Herbstreit, a former Ohio State player, even suggested maybe they'd have been better off having this as a road game, that the home fans are not going to be all that enthused. But, they turned it on, and they go on a run, and they win the national championship. And this is the new era we live in, is a team that wouldn't have ever had a shot at a national championship is now got a realistically good shot at the national championship. But that was a team that was legitimate national championship caliber talent. I don't know if Arizona State was really, I think they obviously had a couple great players and a really nice run, but were they ever national championship caliber team? And definitely SMU was not. SMU was a complete charity case. There was no reason for them to be there. They won a very mediocre league in the ACC, and they won the right. Actually, they didn't. They got into the championship game, they lost, and the committee decided that to take the position that we're not going to punish a team that made the championship game, so they're going to stay in, even though Clemson had basically claimed their spot. But they were not competitive. They lost to Penn State. Didn't look all that good doing it. They were not a competitive team, really. I mean, there was a charity case, like, yay, more fan bases are energized. Look, SMU's in the playoff. All right, great. So what? Here's a team that has no chance of winning a championship, and you're just making teams that do have a chance to win a championship play extra games. So I don't know if that's really valuable. I think that's something that we could see. One of my big concerns, and you talk about devaluing it, and so I've already mentioned in quarter three, talk about quarter two, quarter three, the way that the SEC championship, all of this discussion about Georgia fans even asking, should we be doing this? Do we want to be? Are we excited about being in the SEC championship? Well, even that discussion is unthinkable. I mean, in all of my time growing up as a SEC fan, a Georgia fan, the SEC championship was the pinnacle. I mean, Spurrier used to, look, just win. You play for the SEC championship. You win an SEC championship. Everything else will work itself out. If you'll be in a position where you need to be relative to the national championship discussion. So nowadays we're looking at it, and you have to wonder if playing in this game, I mean, I don't know if Alabama's excited about playing in this game either. I mean, we at least have the value of being able to go and correct the one mistake we made, show that we can beat every team on our schedule. If we win this game, we'll have beaten every team we played this year. We'll just have had to take it two opportunities to beat Alabama. So, but we'll have beaten every team we played, and that'll be a nice correction. And all the reasons we've already talked about why it'd be so big and cathartic for us. And I think it'd be great jumping into the rest of the playoff. But for Alabama, I can look at this and say they must think the same thing I thought about if we had gotten stuck playing Ole Miss. I don't want to play them again. What's the value? We already beat them. If you're Alabama, you look at this game, you say, we went on the road and beat Georgia. They're number 3 in the country. We already beat them. What do we gain by beating them again? Yes, we're going to get to have an SEC championship trophy if you win that. And they may or may not get a seed. And so here's what's funny. So the playoff rankings come out this night or Tuesday night, and Alabama has moved up over Notre Dame from 10 to 9. And there's all kinds of things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. We'll have to do that in another podcast. But that suggests that if they lost this game, they could move back to 10 and still be safe, because the 11 and 12 spots are going to end up being the real charity spots, where we're going to have an ACC champion, maybe, unless it's Duke. If Duke manages to beat Virginia in the ACC championship game, that's a whole nother problem. And most people haven't realized, but it's been coming out lately because of Duke being in the game, that it's not automatic that the conferences it's just that the ACC gets a bid. It's that the top 5 conference champions get a bid. So in other words, if Duke wins and they're not even ranked in the top 25 because they're only 7-5 coming into this game and they're not in the top 25, they could actually be left out of the playoffs. So I'm not going to get into all the details of that, but long story short is seeds 11 and 12, assuredly the way it's set up now, because neither spot currently is held by a team in the top 12. That means that seeds 11 and 12 are going to be bumped out of there. So, and that's, I guess, what Miami and BYU right now. So BYU has a chance to play Texas Tech, who's in the 4 seed. We're in the 3 seed. Ohio State and Indiana in the 1 seed. Now, a big question will be, are Indiana and Ohio State going to hold on to buys, even if one of them's going to lose. They're playing in their conference championship game. And so one of them's going to lose, one of them's going to win. And again, talk about devaluing. This is, again, what this playoff system is doing to college football. So while you're all excited about including teams like, oh, yay, whatever group, Tulane may get in the championship. Wonderful. Tulane's going to get in the championship. There'll be a 3-touchdown underdog to whatever team they play. They'll go on the road in a freezing cold environment and get their ass kicked and be sent back home packing. And hopefully they'll have felt really great about the experience. Congratulations. Here's your participation trophy. We invited you to something you didn't deserve. So that's what you're going to get out of that. And now I'm not all that worried about BYU or Miami because again, I don't think these teams that are down here around the 9, 10, 11, 12 spot, most of them, most years are really not worthy. They're not likely to beat the teams. I mean, you look at the top teams, there's a huge separation right now between what Ohio State and Indiana and Georgia have done. Okay, but Ohio State and Indiana are way above the pack in terms of how they've played against all competition. Then you have Georgia, which has really set itself apart, I think, and become rounded into that championship team we're talking about. Texas Tech may be there, but we really don't know for sure. They haven't played anybody out of conference yet. Their conference is just pretty good. Okay. It's, so better than the ACC. I'll give them that. But, and we're in their championship game. We're not going to get to see something very much of a proving ground either, because it's a rematch of a game we already saw Texas Tech win 29-7, I think, or something like that was the score. So we're just getting a rematch of a game we already saw Texas Tech win handily. So again, here's what the modern situation has done, though. You have a 1 versus 2 matchup this week in the Big Ten championship. Indiana in the game for the first time ever. Indiana going for a conference championship, I think, for the first time since the 60s. Okay, and it really doesn't matter in the big picture. Like, neither of these teams. I mean, I'm sure Indiana will be thrilled to win a Big Ten championship, having not had a championship of any kind, if they can beat Ohio State since the 60s. That being said, even Indiana, lowly Indiana, at this point, having been undefeated all season, dominating the teams they played and being number 2 in the country, I'm sure Indiana has their sights focused on the playoff and the national championship. And so this game if both of them are still going to end up with a bye, the game was meaningless, really. 1 versus 2, maybe. Okay, let's say Ohio State wins and Indiana loses by a field goal. There's a pretty good chance Ohio State stays number 1, Indiana falls to number 3, Georgia moves up to number 2, and if Texas Tech beats BYU, they'll stay number 4. So again, games really didn't mean anything. Texas Tech goes and wins against BYU again, still seeded 4th. Ohio, number 1 versus 2 matchup for the Big 12 or for the Big Ten championship. Who cares? Winner, loser, they're both going on to the playoff. They're both going to get a bye. Okay. Didn't gain anything out of that, did we? So we did. At least we finally got to see the 2 teams actually play somebody. I guess that's what we got out of that. And then, Georgia, if we win, we're already a 3rd seed. If we win, maybe we move up to a 2 seed instead of whichever of those 2 teams loses. But that doesn't change that much. It's still on the same side of the bracket. So, okay, as the 2 seed, we'd be eligible to play the winner of the 7-10 matchup instead of the 6-11 matchup. Well, if that 11 team wins, it'd been an easier game. I mean, I don't know. Right now, the 6-11 matchup would be Ole Miss versus whichever team gets, either the ACC team or the Group of 5 champion. So let's say that's the ACC team. So let's just say Virginia wins. They'll get that 11 seed in the place it is right now. So the 6 seed. So right now we're a 3 seed. So that means we would play the winner of the Ole Miss Virginia matchup in the scenario I just said. Ole Miss probably wins that game. I mean, Virginia's been good enough this year. Haven't played enough outside their conference for us to know, but they've been good enough to say, hey, they might have a chance. Either way, Ole Miss could be a tough matchup again, but we should be the better team. So we'll see. If we moved up to the 2 seed, then it would be the 7-10 matchup, which right now is Texas A&M and Notre Dame. So that's a rematch. Here's another thing the playoff is giving us. And here's my other big gripe. And I'm going to have to wrap it up because we're way over our 15 minutes in the quarter. But I reserve the right to go into overtime in quarter 4, and we're going into overtime a little bit here. But Texas A&M and Ole Miss, and Notre Dame, that's a rematch. And here's what I'm really afraid of. Here's what I really don't want is if Alabama doesn't. So there's 2 things could happen. Some people are wondering if Alabama loses to Georgia, could they actually be bounced out of the playoff? Because then they would have 3 losses. Now, Clemson had 3 losses last year, but they earned the automatic bid, so it wasn't a choice. They won the game and they got the automatic bid. So. But we haven't seen a team just sort of be selected with a 3 loss. So Alabama would have to be selected if they lost to Georgia and had 3 losses. They're at 9 right now. So the fact that they moved up 1 spot makes me think that they could move back down 1 spot if they lost and still be in that 10 slot and still get the thing. So they would slide down into the 10 slot. So here's the negative. Let's say we win the game. We move up to the 2 slot. Let's say the loser of the Big Ten championship falls behind us to the 3. We move up to the 2 slot, and Alabama gets bumped down to the 10 slot, but, so they lose 1 position for losing, but they're still in the playoff. Well, guess what? Now we're slated to play them if they win their playoff game. We'll have the bye. So they'll have another game. But literally, for us, we could end up with back-to-back games against Alabama. And it could be the 3rd Alabama game of the year. So that's what this playoff system is giving us. I mean, you talk about devaluing the regular season. Everybody keeps trying to tell, when you see how much excitement there is when so-and-so plays so-and-so, how can you say the regular season is being devalued? Just because it's a great game and everybody's excited about it doesn't mean it's not being devalued. This 1 versus 2 matchup versus Indiana, Ohio State, nobody cares. Isn't going to decide anything. I mean, on the national level, I'm sure Indiana will be excited if they win. I'm sure Ohio State would be excited if they win. But Ohio State's looking all the way past this. I mean, Big Ten is just something they have to do. I promise you. Just like us. It's a shame, but that's the way the history of these great conferences and their history, proud history, where winning the championship of the Big Ten or the SEC was everything, meant you were one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country every year if you did it. Well, that's gone by the wayside. That's already gone by the wayside. There's nothing we could do about that. That happened before this. That once we went to any kind of a playoff, we started doing that because we let Alabama in to win a national championship when they didn't even win their conference. We've already gone down that road once we went to the 4-team playoff and we didn't require that you had to win the conference. And I'm not saying we should have, but that's what happened. So now you've just devalued it even further because now everybody's talking about the playoff. It's all about, do you make the playoffs? Did you make the playoff? And we're inviting 12 teams to the playoff. And there are not 12 championship caliber teams in any season. So that's why you got charity. Teams at the bottom are charity. And then we make the charity even bigger because we're going to invite teams that really didn't earn it. They didn't even make the top 12, but we created some special rules. Group of 5, here you get a spot. Conference champion that didn't make it in the top 12, we'll give you a spot too. Okay. I mean, should just be the straight the straight best 12 teams. That would at least be more fair. It gets even worse when you put all this charity on it. But because it's already charity. I mean, once you get past 8, I think 8 might be reasonable, but most of the time when you go back and look at the 4-team playoff, you could barely find 4 teams that were truly elite. You have 2 or 3 teams. You say these are national championship level teams. Let's let them play and put out. You put a 4th team in. That's what we had with TCU. I've said that before, right? TCU is clearly not a national championship worthy team. Yeah, they beat Michigan, but look what happened when they played a real championship caliber team. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, they lost by 2 scores or even 3 scores or even 4 scores. They lost by an epic score. So, I mean, one game doesn't prove everything, but this is the devaluation we have here. Ohio State, Indiana, yes, Indiana will be happy if they win the Big they'll be ecstatic, I'm sure, if they win the Big Ten championship. Georgia will be ecstatic if it wins the SEC championship because we beat Alabama. If we beat Texas A&M or Ole Miss in this game, had we played them, would we be as ecstatic? Probably not. So just because of where we are with Alabama, it's a big deal. But you've made these games where we're questioning, like, is this actually a punishment? I mean, Alabama, we're not sure we want to play in it. I'm sure Alabama's thinking, I would rather not be doing this if I'm an Alabama fan. So that's what you've done to the game. You've turned a 1 versus 2 matchup into who cares? It's just, and it doesn't mean anything on the national stage. We're just going to rearrange the seating. Instead of 1 and 2, they'll be 1 and 3 maybe. Or they might even stay 1 and 2. If the committee is so impressed with how well they play against each other, and they just think, wow, that was great. I mean, it was 31-30. Both teams were amazing. They might leave them 1 and 2. It might literally mean nothing. So, and for us, we run the risk, like I said, and that's all I'm hoping. So what we need to see, and there's a lot of different scenarios. It's going to be too hard to map it out exactly. But the scenario we're really best hoping for, win or lose, I would say is let's not face Alabama again in a worst case scenario until the national championship game. You know, hopefully we can get on the wrong side or on the opposite side of a bracket. So to do that, we need to win the game and be on the opposite side of the bracket, which means if we're the 2 or the 3 seed, then if Alabama then loses but stays in the playoff, hopefully they're not the 7, 10, or 11 seed. I don't think they'd make it as high as the 6 seed. They wouldn't go up after losing us. So they'd be the 10 or 11 seed. And I don't think they would necessarily be the 10 or 11 seed. They'd probably be the 10 seed. So in the 10 seed, if we moved up to the 2, if we win and move up to the 2 seed and they're the 10 seed, then right now that would have them playing Texas A&M. If they beat Texas A&M, then our next game, we'd play them in the SEC championship game. Our next game would be our first playoff game against Alabama yet again. That's a travesty. We don't need to see teams playing each other 3 times in one season. That's ridiculous. Okay, that's one of the terrible things that could come from the way we've set up this circumstance. So hopefully, if we lose and we fell to the 5th seed, I don't know if Alabama would jump all the way up to one of the seeds, the 4 seed. If they did, that would work in the same problem. Then we would have a game. So we would maybe say, let's say Tulane wins the game in the American Conference. So we play Tulane at home and beat them by 25 points and then go on to play the number 4 seed. Well, in that scenario, if Alabama beat us and they move up into the top seed, they'd probably be the 4 seed. So if we were the 5 seed, then again, we would get what we wanted, a home playoff game at home as the 5 seed against the easiest team to play. But our reward for beating down Tulane would be to go on to play Alabama again in the next game because they'd be the 4 seed and we'd be the 5 seed. So this has all kinds of problems in it for us. So again, it's going to be too hard to predict exactly where it goes out and say what we should do. I'm just saying this will be something to watch. I think we don't worry about it. Again, you can't design anything about it. We want to go out. We want to win the game, get our 16th SEC championship, get that monkey off the back, have that ecstatic run into the playoff where we know we can beat anybody and anybody. But let's just hope we don't have to turn around and beat the same team again. Because again, we don't even know what the precedent for that is. The precedent right now has been in rematches, Georgia has come out ahead in games they lost first. Alabama hasn't beaten Georgia twice yet when they've had the opportunity. Neither did Auburn when they had the opportunity. But I hope we don't have to get to a third time. So, listen, this has been a great thing, though, to think about. This is what you call first world problems or whatever those silly phrases you want to talk about are. Obviously, worrying about where we're going to be seated and what's going to happen in the playoff is, a great problem to have, right? So I think if we win, I think we're going to stay either third or second seed. If we lose, I don't think we fall any more than the fifth seed. So then the big question is what happens to Alabama, whether we win or lose. Where do they end up? And hopefully they end up on the opposite side of the bracket, meaning that if we stay the third or second seed, hopefully they become the ninth seed or stay in the ninth seed. That's, I guess, what we'd have to hope for right now. Let's say we win, we stay second or third, or we move up to second or we stay third, then Alabama has to hold at 9 if they stay in the playoff field. Because if they hold at 9, then they're in the other side of the bracket. They would be in the 8-9 matchup, which right now is set would be Alabama-Oklahoma. And then the winner of that would advance to play the winner of the Big Ten championship, or let's say that's Ohio State at this point. So that's okay, right? So then in that version, Alabama would have to get through Ohio State and then get through the winner of maybe Oregon, Texas Tech, who then would play the winner of Ohio State, Alabama, and then we would only see that team all the way in the championship. So if somehow that turned out to be Alabama, that's, I guess, the best circumstances. Like if we have to play them again, let's only do it if it's for all the marbles in the championship game. So hopefully they stay on the other side of the bracket. And that's one thing that at least came with the committee moving Alabama up to 9. Maybe that's even why they did it. There's a lot of consternation out there, but maybe are they that forward thinking to say, hey, let's go ahead and put the seeding in so that if Georgia wins, they're going to stay in the second or third slot. We're going to put Alabama in 9 just to make sure that they don't end up playing each other in the next game after the SEC championship. I don't know if they thought that far in advance, but I wouldn't mind it if they did. So anyway, look, Beat Bama week. We're going to come back. Maybe we get 2 podcasts in, one for Thursday, one for Friday, but definitely keep an eye out. No later than Friday, we'll be back where we go through the stats and we start breaking down what these teams have done since they last played. What do the stats tell us? What trends can we see that are going to help us understand what's different or what's the same about the game from week 4 to now a week 15 game after we've won 8 in a row and after they've managed to go through only having 1 SEC loss on the season. And so we're going to find out. We're going to go through all that and we'll unpack it. At least that'll be a Friday podcast. Maybe we'll do Thursday and Friday. We'll find out. And then we'll figure out where we put in the predictions. I'll tell you more about it in the next one. Thanks for being with us. Just keep thinking Beat Bama thoughts all week long as we get ready, and go Dogs.